Welcome to CTO Insights, where we unpack the strategies behind high-performing engineering teams. I'm your host, Katerina, and today I have the pleasure of welcoming Alex Kroman, CPTO at AssemblyAI, with a passion for building and scaling high-performing teams. Alex has played a pivotal role in scaling companies like Relic from 5 million to 800 million in revenue, and led the launch of autonomous AI agents at LivePerson, empowering some of the world's largest enterprises to innovate and grow. In our conversation, we unpack the advantages and challenges of combining the Chief Technology Officer and Chief Product Officer in a single role. We talk about its impact on team performance, alignment between product and engineering, and dealing with trade-offs during planning. Alex describes the team structures that work well in a CPTO-led organization, their approaches for delivering fast while maintaining quality, and how developer experience is ingrained in their day-to-day work. Stay tuned, and don't forget to subscribe for more insights into creating high-performing teams and standout products. This episode is brought to you by Adiva, a global network of top developers connecting businesses with world-class talent. Whether you need to scale your team or bring an idea to life, Adiva empowers you to increase your engineering capacity without the overhead of traditional hiring. Visit adiva.it to learn more. Alex, welcome. Thank you for joining me today.
Thanks so much for having me, Katerina. It's great to be here.
Let's start with a quick introduction. You are the CPTO at AssemblyAI, and you have a combined role of Chief Product Officer and Chief Technology Officer. Can you tell us, at first, what led you to take on such a role, and then how does it differ from traditional CTO and CPO positions?
Well, I'll start off talking about why I wanted to get a combined product and technology role. I've been doing this combined role for about 6 years now. I started off in engineering. So I started off as a software engineer, became an engineering manager. But I always knew that I had a lot of love for building product. And I saw a lot of silos between product management and engineering. And I just really thought that the best products could be built by people just working together and not being part of those silos. So when I was at New Relic, I was at a company called New Relic that did observability and monitoring for software applications. I was there for 10 years since it was a very, very small startup. And in the last few years there, I had a combined product and engineering role. And then I left and went to LivePerson, where I was the CPTO. And very recently, I've joined Assembly as their first CPTO. And a CPTO, just at a high level, it combines both product and technology into one executive role. So a CPTO typically will have product management, engineering, design, and typically product operations as well, reporting to them. And so that's how what the role looks like in its basic shape.
The first, there are a lot of people advocating for this shift towards a combined role, basically to avoid the gap between product and engineering that's present in many organizations. But then on the other side, there are people hesitant about it, thinking that CPTO might be a bit more customer-centric than having a separate, CTO and CPO positions that balance each other out. Let's talk a bit about, the challenges, the pros and cons of combining the two positions, and how has that, shown in practice for you?
Yeah, I think it's something that has grown in popularity over the last few years. I think especially at companies that are just really technology focused. So companies that are maybe creating a product that is used by developers or is a very tech-centric product. I think you see the CPTO role, occurring in a lot of those companies. So I think, when you look at some of the advantages to it, I think the major I think there's probably three major advantages. The first one is that it just it really removes the silos between product and engineering. When those organizations are part of a broader CPTO organization, there's generally one vision, a unified set of goals, and that just really naturally, I think, brings those organizations together. I think another advantage that isn't really talked about a lot is just simply that it reduces the burden on the CEO. I think, managing two executives, a product executive and a CTO, and really making sure that they are aligned and integrated, that's a lot of work. And I think when a company is really starting to scale and get traction, and the CEO has to really be paying attention to the entire business, it can be really helpful for them to have a single person in charge of both technology and product. And I think the last thing is really just it's a lot easier to establish accountability with a role like this. You have one person who's in charge of the product, both what it is and how it's being built and how quickly it's being built, and there's no finger pointing there. And I think really having that level of accountability is super important. In terms of the challenges, I think it can be a hard role to hire for. It's somebody that needs to have, obviously a lot of engineering experience and product experience. You mentioned in your question that some people think that a CPTO might be focusing maybe too much on customers and not enough on the technology. In my experience, the majority of CPTOs actually come from the engineering world, as opposed from the product management world. And so I actually think the bias is more likely to be on the engineering side in those roles. And so you kind of have to make sure that you really counteract that bias. And another challenge is that there's just a lot of tension and balancing between competing priorities around technology, technical debt, quality, product roadmap. But and that's a challenge, but I think it's really a feature of the combined role. Those trade-offs are inherent in any kind of product development, and I think it's just really important to have people, and it's not just the CPTO, it's people throughout the entire organization who are just constantly thinking about the trade-offs between quality and velocity and new features and developer experience, rather than having those be siloed kind of discussions.
Mm-hmm. There are a lot of things there that I want to touch on. Let's start with planning. So first, it sounds a bit obvious that the role would help remove these gaps between product and engineering, because when it's a single person experienced in both product and engineering, then the trade-offs are, I guess, more educated, and people know what to choose over. How can I put it? Like it's easier to choose what to focus on when you have both perspectives. And then when planning, how do these trade-offs come, and how do you choose what is more worthy to focus on, especially talking about technical debt and other things that are more on one side or the other?
Yeah, it's such a big question. How do you decide what's important? I mean, I think that, at a high level, I think that question, it is the question of what executives do. It's like figuring out the trade-offs and the priorities. And it's a really difficult thing. We get it wrong all the time. But, when I think about the planning process, what I always do, and I think all CPTOs do this, is have a single unified roadmap for everything that is being worked on. And even in organizations that don't have a CPTO, I think having a single roadmap that includes customer-facing work and infrastructure work, developer experience work, I think it's really important, because so many companies will have a roadmap, like a feature roadmap, and everything that's not a feature going out to customers is just completely hidden from the rest of the company. They don't, they don't have an understanding because it's just not talked about. It's not part of the roadmap. And so I think to have good trade-off discussions, you have to first describe and make visible all of the work that is actually happening. And so often, in a typical organization, feature work is maybe about half of the work that is happening in terms of time, and so much of the focus goes into just trading off that 50%, but it doesn't actually, but you have a much more effective conversation if all of the work that is happening in an organization is seen, and you can trade off between all of it. In terms of picking what's important between those things, I think it's really important to have what would typically be called a North Star metric in terms of what is the thing that you are trying to do as a leader, or really as a company. Often those metrics might look like something. It might look like attracting new customers, or growing existing customers, or preventing customer churn, are some pretty widely used metrics. And when you identify what's incredibly important to the business, I think you can create a roadmap, both from a product perspective and a technology perspective, that supports both of those things. And so, if, as an example, if churn is a problem, maybe you have to work on features that customers are leaving you for competitors. Maybe churn's a problem because reliability is an issue, or the user experience isn't as good as it could be. And so you work on that. Maybe instead, though, you need to focus on new customer acquisition. And in that case, it's about creating, launching more innovative features. But as part of that, you also have to be creating the developer experience that allows the creation of features to be very quick, because you're in this very competitive. Every company is in such a competitive environment, and it's not enough to just build a new feature for customers. You also have to build a system that allows you to build new features faster than your competitors. And so you kind of have to do both of those things at once. And so really framing for the organization what's the most important thing to do, I think is really important. And then both the developer experience tasks, the infrastructure tasks, the product roadmap tasks, they all can fit into a coherent narrative there.
So if we talk about how this happens in practice, like when you plan the work, do you have dedicated portion of time to feature work, platform work, developer experience, or is it all kind of intertwined and then as part of one, I don't know, as part of the work that you do for the customer focused features, you also work on resolving all the underlying tech debt and then also focusing on some additional developer experience improvements. How does it look in practice?
I think, it definitely depends. But I think in combination with other people on my team and really other folks in the overall company, I will generally try to set some investment ratios between those different ideas. So depending on what the company needs to do. So like if they're having a churn problem and the churn is related to a combination of user experience issues as well as reliability issues, then I'd probably set a goal to have a very large percentage of the work that's happening in the organization be focused on improving reliability and improving user experience. And then those guidelines would sort of would be part of the process, and teams would be proposing work that they think is most likely to move the indicators on those metrics. And so I think, I will try kind of at the beginning of a planning cycle to set some investment ratios that are coherent with the goal that we're trying to move towards. But at the same time, I think it's always pretty flexible. It's more of like a starting condition to see what teams come up with, and then you go through this iterative process of essentially funding the work that is coming back from the planning process based on the understanding of how it can advance the goals of the organization.
And then looking at the organization as a whole, what's the structure of the teams? Do you have separate product and engineering managers, or do you have combined roles further down the company hierarchy? How is it structured?
Yeah. In my career, I've probably experimented with almost every organizational structure that's possible. I think there's the right organizational structure there isn't one. I mean, it very much depends on what you're trying to do. And I think each structure has its trade-offs and its benefits and its cons. And I think it's always just really important to, if you're moving to a certain structure, knowing what you're going to get from it, knowing what the cost and the pain of that is going to be. And there's just no silver bullet with any of this stuff. I think there are a few things that when it comes to organizational structures that I think I do lean towards in terms of design principles. One of the bigger things is this idea of every project having in a single responsible person. So essentially a single leader who is accountable for the results of that project. Now, kind of in the combined structure, the way that I think about assigning that is, and generally that single responsible person is going to be either an engineering leader or a product leader. And what we'll typically do as a team is, based on the planning process I was talking about earlier, you have some goals, you have some metrics that you're trying to move, you have and those end up the organization ends up creating a bunch of projects that will essentially, when they get delivered, the assumption would be that they would move that stuff. And each of those projects need a single leader. And the way that I think about that is I want the leader for those projects to be maybe the person in the organization who knows the most about it, or who or maybe can help best deal with like the risk and the ambiguity of the project itself. And so, as a really basic example, I would typically be having engineering leaders lead highly technical projects where like the success and failure of it really depends on the technical execution. And conversely, for products that or for projects that have just a lot that needs so much customer interaction and like really great requirements and just a lot of work with customers in a beta program and things like that, I would typically put product managers as the leads on that kind of work. And so in some ways it does map to what a lot of different organizations will do, where you have product managers leading more customer facing work and engineering leaders leading more engineering facing work. But the line is definitely blurry there, because every project that a product manager is leading has a technical component, and almost every project that an engineering leader is running has a customer component as well. And so while those leaders still are mostly focused on their core competency, the boundaries are blurred a little bit there. And so I think that that is one, I think, really important piece around how I think about organization. Another way that I think about it as well is so you have a project, you have a person who is in charge of it, who's the single responsible person. I also think it's incredibly important to have a team that's 100% dedicated to that project. And sometimes that team can just completely follow the boundaries of the organization. Like there is an engineering team that builds this kind of project. But oftentimes you have to have a team that is crossing multiple engineering teams, or maybe even multiple product managers as well. And I want to really make sure that all of them are in a team unit and completely dedicated to that work. And so, in the organizations that I work in, you see really some shifting around as projects kind of come and go. Now, typically, there's a trade-off cost for doing that, because it takes a long time for teams to gel and form. And so you kind of have to balance those two things, because you don't want to be constantly forming and changing new teams. But I think it's super important to, have a team that can work on this thing and not require a bunch of coordination with other people to make it happen. And so those are two different ways that I think about organizational structure. Blurring team boundaries for projects, single responsible person. But with all that said, I do, from a reporting structure, I do generally keep things aligned, where there is a product management reporting structure and an engineering management reporting structure. I think it's, I've experimented with doing it where it's the reporting structure is more based on the project and the product. But I think having an incredibly stable reporting line and reporting to somebody who just knows how to do the work that you do and can can really guide you is really important. So I keep the reporting lines pretty stable, and then have project teams that are very, very cross-functional.
That's very interesting. I had some follow-up questions that you already answered, but maybe we can dig a bit further into all of this. So first, you mentioned that you have either product manager or engineering manager taking on the lead role for the project. So that means it's usually like a person that's an expert in one or the other. You don't have a specific hiring process for assessing like cross-functional skills or the ability to understand product if you're an engineering expert, for example.
I actually do. I am looking, and you'll see this. I always kind of advocate this in job postings. I mean, I will call, the role engineering manager, and I'll call the role product manager. But for product managers, I'm always looking for some level of technical depth. And then for engineering managers, I'm looking for product skills as well, especially if you're an engineering manager working in components that are more closely aligned to what customers are using. And so I very, very much think that the best organizations and the best teams have, engineers that are like really passionate about the product, and product managers who are really passionate about the technology. And so, I'm definitely looking for strong core engineering skills and strong core product management skills, but definitely looking for skills in both. I do think it does limit. It is a filter a bit on the people who potentially want that kind of job. I mean, I think there are a lot of product managers who just love working with the technology. There's a lot of engineering leaders who love building products. So it doesn't filter it too much, but it is a bit of a filter on kind of that on that incoming process. But and I think it's definitely a lot more common in startup companies or really kind of pre-IPO companies. I think it's actually more common for that, for product managers to have the tech skill set and for engineering leaders to have more of a product skill set. I think it gets a little bit rarer when you get into larger organizations, but it's definitely, I think, very, very common in the startup world.
Okay. And then when you mentioned like the team boundaries and shifting people across different projects, how often does that happen? And do you have like a separate project for everything, or do you have constant flow of similar features that go to specific teams, for example, that work together on?
Yeah. So there's that's a great question. There is stable teams that cover the entire product, and even the project teams, I will try, and I will try to keep stable, and it will depend on. That does depend, I think, on the market and the organization and what needs to happen. But I do think of the project teams as like in my head, at least, like I want them to last maybe a year. So it's not necessarily like they'd be working on a entire roadmap of projects as opposed to like a single 6-week project and then disbanding. And so, I'll take a look at how that's working every quarter. And so there might be some shifting around every quarter, but in general, trying to keep those project teams static and stable for about a year.
And when we speak about, the trade-offs between delivering fast and then having solid development processes, proper planning, and following all the best practices and everything, how do you achieve this? Do you have any, I guess you don't have a bulletproof strategy, but any advice on, keeping a balance between delivery speed and also having the tech infrastructure at the highest level?
My philosophy around delivery speed is that, I don't really think there is a process that makes things faster, or you can just kind of like set big deadlines or be very willful as a leader and things start moving fast. I think, my philosophy is very much that to move fast, you have to build software that like helps you move fast. And so you have to create, this what would be called maybe a developer experience team or an engineering enablement team, combined with, an overall infrastructure team. But I think, in terms of moving fast, you really have to ask developers, like, what's slowing you down? Like, what is the bottleneck? What is the constraint in you being able to move faster? And it's often, it's very typically, functionality in parts of the platform or the CI/CD system or the test infrastructure or spinning up new servers. I mean, it can be a ton of different things. I think it's really important not to work on improving all of that at once. There will be too much stuff there, but you actually have to think about it from a theory of constraints perspective, and really kind of talk to all the developers and like understand what is the current constraint to speed across the most developers right now, and then you have to prioritize that. And I very much think about running a product organization as shipping two products. One product is the product that is on the website and it's what the customers use, and another product is what the developers inside the company use to build that product. And in some companies, you actually, that product is actually something that customers use as well, because you have a developer platform that customers can build on top of. So I think of, I really think that you have to do both of those things because, whenever you're competing, especially if you're a startup, like you have to have a system that allows you to iterate quicker, build faster, and than your competitors. So you can't just, that's really kind of like the only way to win. And so you have to be really focused on creating a system that allows you to do that. Because if you have a system that is, if you take two companies and one company can iterate faster and build faster, it's almost always going to win because it allows there to be mistakes and decision making and prioritization. You can kind of recover from that. There was a story I read many years ago about the airplane industry and why the Wright brothers got the first airplane. Like, how did a bunch of young bike mechanics, how did they beat all of these like well-capitalized companies? And there was a quote that I don't know, I'm going to massacre the quote, but it was something like, I think one of the Wright brothers said, it's to build an airplane, like it's not about building the airplane. Like, you don't have to be the best at building the airplane, because the main thing you do when you're building an airplane is that you're crashing airplanes. So the main thing that you have to do is be able to like really quickly fix the airplane. and then fly it again. And I've always thought about that. I thought that was it was such a great metaphor for, I think, how startups can win. It's like you have to experiment, fail, but like have these systems in place where you can do that really quickly. So yeah, so I definitely think about building these two products at once. And I often like to have different people focused on that. Maybe I'm a big believer in developer experience teams, and having just a team focused on building that system that allows you to go faster. And I think the investment into that component just depends on what you're trying to do. But like when you're trying to innovate, you actually have to have like a pretty big investment into like tooling. And I think that's I think it's super important.
I love this. And like supporting this with metrics, you spoke a lot about developer experience, then also about North Star metrics on product level earlier. Do you measure developer experience anyhow and the impact that this investment has on the performance of the team in general?
Yeah. I think it's I definitely think it's really important to measure the developer experience in a few ways, both with objective metrics, but also with survey data as well. In terms of the objective metrics, I think things like deploy frequency, number of PRs, mean time to recovery, percentage of time spent on innovation versus like maintenance and bug fixes. I think those can be some pretty decent objective measures. But I think you have to balance that out with survey results as well. I mean, and just like literally asking like, how productive do you feel you are? Or, what is your current constraint in moving faster? And I think so I think you measure those, and I don't see it as trying to get to a certain measure or anything like that. And I definitely don't think about it as a way to evaluate developers. It's really about top level metrics. It's not like pull requests, like looking at like ranking developers by the number of pull requests, but it's just like looking at that across the board and seeing if things are improving, and just I think constantly being looking for that continuous improvement and looking for things going in a positive direction. And I think that's one of the most important things I'm looking for there. You just kind of have to constantly be improving it.
Super. What's your tip when it comes to using metrics? Because a lot of times it's, instead of enhancing productivity, it's kind of creating a burden, especially if you're using them to evaluate developers or as some sort of targets, like we had that many pull requests earlier, we need to increase the number. Looking at the metric in isolation can also be misleading.
Yeah, there's all sorts of problems that you can run into with metrics. And I think what's really, I think there's a few things you can do to use metrics in a good way. I mean, I think the first thing is to really focus on business metrics and trying to identify the leading indicators that actually move those business metrics forward. So if you're at a top level, you have like a business metric to, increase the renewals of the base of customers. Well, what's your hypothesis on what the product and engineering team can do to increase renewals? And I think really that's a hard thing to figure out. But I think just establishing a connection between, it doesn't have to be a ton of metrics, but like just a few. Maybe it's like the customer satisfaction with the install process drives more leads, or something like that. But if you can demonstrate to the team that improving that business, like a leading indicator metric, actually will result in more revenue a quarter or two from now, I think that creates a lot of trust there. And so I think leaders can be like too focused on productivity metrics. And I do think those are important to some degree, but I think you don't want to, like, activity doesn't matter. Like it's about the revenue. And frankly, there is a ton of activity that goes on in companies that just doesn't lead to good outcomes. It doesn't lead to more business. And so you really want to mostly focus on things that lead to business outcomes. And so I think that is one thing that I really try to focus on. In terms of more developer metrics, I think there are metrics like deploy frequency, and especially like mean time to recovery or like change failure rates, that are very connected to customer experience. Like, absolutely, change failure rates lead to customer attrition. High MTTRs lead to customer attrition. Lack of kind of constant updates and delivery impacts revenue growth. And I think, I do lean a lot more towards those kind of metrics. And then I also think it's really important to, not talk about metrics in isolation, but have some kind of, here's the 6 that we look at. We look at it every week. And they all kind of, in some ways, balance each other out. Like you can take any metric and you can game it and you can optimize for it. But if you have a few that are in balance with each other, you want to make it so that if you are maybe over optimizing on one thing, you see the impact on the other. And so, as like an example there, like you want to maybe keep track of, the average number for engineers who are on call, like how many times are they paged off hours during their shift. So maybe you have a metric like that, which will allow you to see like, oh, we pushed super hard and we released this thing too early and the number of pages going up, and you kind of like, it allows you to sort of balance out the organization more and know if you're making decisions that are maybe breaking part of the system that you don't want to be breaking.
Mm-hmm. I love it how throughout the whole conversation, you just demonstrate the actual benefits of having this combined CPTO role, because in everything that we talked about, especially right now with the metrics and all, you focus on the business, you focus on the product, you focus on the higher value before actually going too narrow with engineering productivity or product productivity or anything in between.
Yeah, I mean, like I would say there has been so many. Yeah, I'm thinking about the kind of activity metric discussion and as well. And, there's been so many times over the years where somebody will make a change, like a PR that is, let's just say it's like a documentation change. It just like maybe documents something better. It includes like an animated GIF to show something. And that change being correlated with more usage and more revenue than like projects that spent, that people, like multiple people spent like a month or two on. And there's, so, I think it's, I think it's just so important to make sure that you can connect the work that people are doing to the actual value.
Okay, so wrapping up, how do you see the CPTO or the movement for combining the CTO and CPO roles into one evolving, especially talking about larger scale organizations? You mentioned it's more common in pre-IPO companies. Does it scale to bigger sizes? What are potentially the challenges?
Yeah. I mean, I definitely think that it is growing in popularity. A few of the recruiters that I've talked to over the last bit of time, I think they've all said that the majority of executive hires right now are CPTO roles. I do think it's more popular in companies that are very tech focused. And honestly, I think there's probably like a cost savings component to that as well. Like if you can not have two executives and just one, like with like, with the I think that's maybe also part of the popularity, to be honest. But yeah, I think it's definitely something that is has been growing, and I do think it scales up to the largest companies. I mean, I think if you just kind of look at maybe history, it's like the people who have built things, like there are always there hasn't been like a big division between like the people who design things and the people who build things. Like they've throughout history have always been really close and really combined. And I think that changed back maybe with Procter and Gamble in like the 1930s, where there was was like the genesis of the product manager who really straddled between like the product development teams and the marketing teams. But I think that that can certainly be useful at some companies in some contexts. But I think the default to me, and what I think we'll see in the future is I think the default will be to have these organizations combined. Yeah, I mean, I think it's like in trying to think through some of the things that we were talking about. But yeah, I think really, I guess if I have some advice, I think it's around really understanding, like I think people are motivated by incentives. And when you have separate structures, you've got between product and engineering, you have different incentives. Product can be incentivized by delivering a roadmap. Engineering can be incentivized by SLA reliability. And so I think if you kind of understand those incentives, and even if you work in an organization that has these roles combined, it kind of gives you a perspective of like why these silos are here. And, I think even if you're working in an organization, I guess probably most organizations today are separated. And I think some things that are helpful, even in those organizations, is this idea of having, single people responsible for projects, having teams that are cross-functional, having shared goals and shared metrics that are business focused, that span across both product management and engineering, having a single roadmap where you are articulating and exposing all of the work that's happening in engineering to the entire company, and not just the feature work that's happening. And then also if there's like one thing I just believe so much, it's like if you're tasked with like improving the speed of an organization, like really focus, like really look to see like what are the constraints, and building things, building platform, building tools that help people move faster as like the place that you go to first, versus like reorganizing a team or something like that. Because I think it's really solid tools that help teams move quickly.
It's amazing. Thank you, Alex. It was a pleasure having you today.
Yeah, thanks so much. It was really great talking with you. I really enjoyed it.
CTO Insights is brought to you by Adiva. To learn more about how we support innovative tech teams, visit adiva.it. Don't forget to subscribe to CTO Insights on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Substack, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Thanks for tuning in.